On the fort. These little rooms are called casemates. These are gun rooms. They're basically bomb-proof gun rooms. You are safe in here. These casemates, they housed Columbiad cannons. These are smoothbore cannons. They came in two sizes, 8 and 10 inch varieties. They could fire a 65 pound up to a 135 pound solid shot with a range of around 3 miles. That's a lot of firepower. Really a lot of firepower. And what are they shooting at, folks? What are their targets? Ships. Excellent. Yesterday I asked that question. I was a little nervous today because yesterday someone said birds. Not birds, folks. Ships. And these windows, by the way, they're not for bird watching either. These windows have a name. They're called embrasures. That means cannon shooting window. So the cannons, they would have been aimed at these windows, but they didn't sit just directly on these gray wacky floors. They sat on carriages that allowed you to drag them around. These carriages had a trailer hitch on them. There's actually one of them sitting right there. You'll see it in a second. It's not mega exciting. It's a flat piece of iron with a loop on the end of it. But what you do is that loop ends up sliding into the little horizontal void underneath the window. There's one under each one. It slides into it, and then if you look into the embrasure, they're pretty beat up, but there's actually a circular bore hole that goes straight down. So after you put your pin in there, you drop you put your trailer hitch in there, you drop a pin down. It locks your cannon carriage in place. Once that cannon carriage is locked in place, it has a second set of wheels on it. And those wheels would engage with iron tracks that you can see the remnants of stuck on these stone floors. You're going to see there's lots of iron pins sticking an inch or so up out of the floor. They're really good at stubbing toes. Let's all be really careful with them. These ones have been hammered down for that purpose, but the rest of them are sticking up pretty good. They're going to try to get you. The second set of wheels would engage on these arcs. There's actually a smaller arc right in front of the window, the embrasure as well, in each one of these. When that happened, that allowed you to aim your cannon back and forth. You could pivot it on those arched tracks. This allowed you to set up a crossfire pattern. The fort was engineered to have over 420 cannons. And the way it was laid out, you could aim at least 125 of them at any one target at the same time. Now that's a lot of firepower. It gets worse for those little boats because the cannon carriages had another purpose. Cannon carriages allowed your cannons to recoils. So when you fire these things, you don't want your cannon just flying out of the room, right? Your cannon carriage allowed it to scoop back and stop at just the right point where your artillery people were able to clear. Here, pretend to be my artillery people.
Okay.
That's it, you're nailing it. You did it exactly right. You just stand there. That's all you gotta do. And then the cannon fires, and then you can clear it out real quick and reload it as efficiently as possible. These things were set up on these carriages that when you really pushed them as hard as you could, now you couldn't do this forever, heat and friction, right? But when you pushed them as hard as you could fire these cannons about once a minute. Now you're looking at 125 cannonballs a minute flying at your little wooden sailboat. I've got a modern sailboat. Not like it's brand new or fancy or anything, it's just not made of wood from the 1500s. I'm not trying to brag here, it's kind of a turd of a boat, but it's fun. But even my modern boat is not going to be able to reset all its lines and sheets, change direction, and get out of the way of a cannonball faster than that cannonball can get to it, let alone 125 of them coming at once a minute. That's 2 cannonballs a second. This is a lot of firepower, people. You are a sitting duck out there. Nobody's getting anywhere near this. But just in case, they did cook up some other plans. You see, these cannons out there, these boats out there, they did also have cannons. Much smaller cannons. They had a range of maybe 1 mile. They'd have to get through 2 miles of crossfire, going about 4 miles an hour, just to be able to return fire. And they didn't want that to be an issue, so they built this fort so strong that it could literally withstand weeks of cannon fire before these walls broke down. These walls are very, very strong, right? So, weeks of, there's no way you can do it. There's no way you're gonna be able to sit out there for weeks returning fire on this fort. It's just not gonna happen. They did worry about their artillery people, though. They wouldn't want somebody coming in at night in a little skiff and hiding out there and using some sharpshooting and trying to pick off the artillerymen. They wanted to protect them. So General Joseph Totten, chief of the Army Corps of Engineers at that time, this guy was a brilliant, brilliant engineering mind. He had an idea for it. See, this guy was an amazing military engineer, and he had an absolute passion for window treatments. He designed these really lovely shutters to go over the embrasures. They called them Totten shutters. They were made of iron and they were bulletproof. They were so well balanced on their hinges that just a light breeze could blow them over. So if you look in each one of these embrasures, there's a locking plate down on the bottom. These Totten shutters would be kept locked closed in front of the cannons, and you'd get one of your taller artillerymen to peek over the top so you could aim your cannon where you wanted, and when you were ready to fire these cannons, you wouldn't open them up and risk gunfire. You'd simply unlock them. You'd fire the cannons with the Totten shutters closed. The hot gases that escape the muzzle before the cannonball would blast them open, cannonball flies out, they'd recoil on the brick, slam, and automatically lock themselves shut back to bulletproof again. Boom. Safe. Pretty cool stuff. Amazing engineering, but they lacked a little bit in the material sciences department back then. Iron shutters and salt air environments. That's a bad combination. They rusted, of course, and iron expands a lot when it oxidizes. So these hinge... This is a very good example. This is one of the most well-built ones that I've seen. Just a couple months ago, we had over 40 of these chug boats washed up on our beaches here. There ended up being so many refugees trying to escape Cuba at the same time. There was a couple thousand just in the lower Keys, and about 350 of these poor souls ended up in the Dry Tortugas. So many that they actually had to evacuate our campers and close down the fort to the public for a week while they figured out how to help these people. Because, I mean, it's 100 miles in a hand. This boat is made in secret pretty much out of garbage. And this one's put together really, really well. It's basically roofing materials and a hack weld job. It's got a little diesel motor and a little 4-cylinder diesel. They call it a chug because they take the transmission off of these motors, they weld the prop shaft directly to the flywheel, and they leave it in idle. It just chug, 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 chug. The noise it makes is where it gets its name. So these things, most of them aren't anywhere near seaworthy. And you're going through the jets or the Gulf Stream. You're crossing 6,000 foot depths between Cuba and here. In that. So you might have felt on the way here, when we got out of the quicksands into the Rebecca, the boat started moving a little more. The deeper the water, the more it's going to move around. On the other side of our reef line, it goes right to a few hundred feet. And then at the edge of the continental shelf, it drops to several thousand feet between here and Cuba. That's the real ocean, folks. That's the open water. And as a sailor, I can tell you, the ocean doesn't discriminate. She doesn't care what wants to be floating on top of her. Ocean's gonna try to kill you. It's a tough place out there. Luckily, we got the Yankee Freedom taking good care of us, so we'll be fine. But I wouldn't want to be crossing the Gulf Stream in one of these things. And this, like I said, this is a really great example of one. I passed a chug boat out on the water a couple months ago. It was a chugless chug boat. It had no motor. There was about 12 people in this thing, and it was basically like just a square chunk of a floating dock. About 12 people literally paddled that dock from Cuba to here. Only they missed. They were dead center between the Marquesas and the Tortugas. You can't see land in any direction from right there. You can't see either of those islands. They were about to slide right through the middle and end up in the Gulf. They would have certainly starved to death out there. There was no way they could have survived. So it's a real sad thing that not all of the world gets to experience the level of freedom that we do here. I'm a super lucky guy. I was born in America, and I mean, if you don't agree with me, that's awesome. You're allowed to, because this is America. You're free to do that. So I don't want to get into any form of actual opinion because I'm wearing my official tour guide shirt. Maybe we could chat more if you saw me out on the streets of Key West. But I'll stick to the facts. We've got the Cuban Adjustment Act of 1966 that dictates that Cubans who come to America are allowed to stay. And if they do, after 1 year, they become citizens. We adapted that later. We updated that later. We made the wet foot, dry foot policy. That just simply means we're not going to pick you up out of American waters. You've got to make it all the way to American soil, get out on your boat, and then you're allowed to stay. Well, in 2017, we ended up taking wet foot, dry foot back. It wasn't to keep Cubans out. It was to keep them from perishing in little boats like this, attempting to get here. We were just about to have open borders. So we canceled wet foot, dry foot. And unfortunately, our diplomatic talks went really far south in the couple of years after that, and we're working on them again. We're fixing our relationship with Cuba as much as we can at the moment. And a couple months ago, we actually just reopened our embassy in Cuba. Now, when that happened, that was basically like the bat signal shining in the sky. That let all the Cubans know, hey, it's the chance. That boat that you've been building in secret, it's time to put that in the water and try to make your escape. And a lot of them did at the same time. So many that they had to shut down the fort. There was about 2,000 Cubans between Key West and here, all at the same time. They were in the Marquesas, they were in Boca Grande. Just so many people trying to escape and have a chance of a better life. Now, I don't blame them. This is a cool place. I'd want to come here too. One person wanted to know about the construction ending here and why that happened, and another person wanted to know about the battles they fought here. We'll start with the battles, okay? Fort was engineered to have 420 cannons, 360-degree defenses. There's got to be shipwrecks all around this place, right? This fort never fired a single shot. Okay, that's not true. We've got a record that it fired one warning shot, which is definitely not an act of aggression. It's kind of the opposite. And then, of course, you got some bored soldiers out here with nothing to do and cannons. If there was a cannon right here, right now, I'd fire it just for fun. I mean, of course they fired some shots, but they never fired a shot in aggression. They came pretty close at the very beginning of the Civil War, though. In January of 1861, the states are all splitting up, and up in Washington, D.C., they fairly certainly know that Florida, the southernmost state, is not going to stay with the Union. It's going to go with the Southern Confederacy. And they only had a handful of soldiers out at this fort at the time. It was mostly workers and engineers. And these are construction dudes. These are local boys. They're already Southerners. They're not going to protect Fort Jefferson from the South. They are the South, right? So they had to send some troops down here, and they chose Major Lewis Arnold and his 2nd Artillery Battalion. These guys were not militia. They were war fighters. They were seasoned. They had been in battle. They had fought in the South. They had fought in the Everglades. They were familiar with mangroves. They knew the terrain and the climate. And they knew that their mission of defend Fort Jefferson was most likely going to be retake Fort Jefferson. They left on the 5th of January, 1861, and they hightailed it. I mean, as fast as they could. They made it down here in only 13 days. They got here on the 18th of January, but while they were on their way, Florida did secede on the 10th of January. But luckily, even though it was 8 days later, they got here before the Confederates arrived. Their last stop would have been Key West, because that was also a Union stronghold. And maybe you heard me on the boat this morning. This was a Union fort through the entire Civil War. This fort never fell to the Confederacy. And Major Lewis Arnold is why. So he left Key West. It's about a 14, 15-hour sail if you're good. First time I sailed from Key West to the Dry Tortugas, it took me 4 days to get here and 2 days to get back. I had no business being on the water. It was really stupid. Super fun, but really stupid. They got here probably about 15, 16 hours after they left Key West. Pitch black. You're getting here in the middle of the night. So you tie up the boat, and the next day you're going to unload and set up and start planning your defenses. But unfortunately, the next day on the 19th, the first Confederate ship comes over the horizon. They beat the Confederates here by 1 day. Now, Major Lewis Arnold, he decided he wanted to send them with a message. He actually let this guy come all the way up to the fort to have a chat with him. Imagine being this sailor. You know what the artillery of the time can do. You know the range of big guns at that time. You get into 3 miles, you gotta be scared. And no one's shooting at this guy. 2 miles, nothing. 1 mile, nothing. This guy must have thought he got here before the Northern forces. He was gonna knock on the door, they were gonna hand him the keys, and he'd be the hero of the Confederacy. Coolest dude of the South. They're gonna sing songs about him, they were chewing tobacco after him. He's gonna be a super cool dude. I guarantee he was really surprised when Major Lewis Arnold walked out the front door in Union uniform. He said, "Hi, you got 10 minutes to leave or I'm gonna blow up your boat and kill y'all." This ship captain listened. He got back on his boat, he left. He didn't look back, he didn't think twice, he just peaced out. And he had no idea that all of the artillery for this fort was still back in Key West at the Martello Towers. It was a bluff. Major Lewis Arnold had the best poker face in American military history. He didn't just bluff this guy, he straight mad dogged him. All this guy had to do was go 4 miles away. You can still see the fort, and the fort can't hit you. If he'd done that, he would have caught the supply ship the next day. He could have sank it. He would have taken this fort. The Civil War would have ended up very differently. And Major Lewis Arnold had his role. I totally respect what he did. I'm not much of a fighter myself, and instead of, these guys obviously would have tried to defend the fort with sidearms and rifles. Major Lewis Arnold didn't want to do that. He used his brain instead. So I think that's a fun story. I'm pretty proud of Major Lewis Arnold. He had a big role here at Fort Jefferson. But that's the closest this fort ever came to an actual fight. Now the next question that somebody wanted to know the answer to was, why did they stop construction? They never actually completed Fort Jefferson. They worked on Fort Jefferson from 1846 all the way up until in the late 1880s, just before the 90s. For example, you can see these people ask me all the time, are these big open windows here, are they like blown out from cannon shots? Why are they so big instead of like the little embrasures below? Well, look at the edges of them. You can see the bricks are staggered. They're keywayed. They're ready for the next brick. This is curtain wall construction. All the weight sits on the piers. These walls do nothing but stop cannonballs. They just never finished these walls. This amazing breeze that we're getting, they took advantage of that. They started moving the soldiers from the barracks and tents down in the parade ground up into these upper casemates where they could actually have some comfort. This was one of Samuel Mudd's ideas. He didn't totally understand. He definitely didn't cure yellow fever. He didn't even totally understand where it came from or how it spread. He had suspicion that mosquitoes were involved, and he knew that mosquitoes can't fly and land on you in the wind. So he started moving soldiers up here. His efforts helped slow the spread of the disease. These upper rooms, they became prison cells. They became barracks rooms, soldiers' quarters. They became storage rooms. This fort was an amazing storage depot.